Okay, welcome everybody. This is F1 Therapist. Um, I'm really not sure how to start this one. Nick kind of caught me by surprise with that last therapy episode. Um, we talked about it a bit in the last F1 Philosophy episode, why I think I'm partially responsible for that therapy rant that he went on. And I have to say, I think Nick was potentially a little hard on himself in that episode, but he definitely did go off the rails a couple of times and get a little, let's say, animated. So, I guess let's just jump right into it. First of all, I did laugh. He thought I'd be upset, get a little heated about some of the things that he said. Um, but I gotta say, it was really funny. I don't agree with a lot of the stuff that he said, but his way of delivering it was definitely comical. And I think overall, he's not wrong. Drive to Survive started as a great idea and a great concept. Season one, I think, was as good as you could get it for the type of show that it is. The type of show where it can't be a true, you know, dyed in the wool F1 fan show because then you would lose the audience you're going for. So they had to do something to make it more entertaining, and they did that in season one. I think season two is starting the decline, and it's just gone downhill from there. That being said, I don't think it's completely useless. I think it still serves a purpose, and as a die-hard F1 fan, I do appreciate a little bit more F1 content in the off season. I just wish they would put it out closer to the end of the season instead of right before the beginning of a new season. But that's me. So I've got a couple of notes here, and I'll just go through a few of them. Starting with the strolls. This is episode one of Drive to Survive for this season. And it's all about Aston Martin and Lance Stroll and Lawrence Stroll. And it was a truly bizarre thing to watch. Nick mentioned it where they seem to do their best to make Lawrence Stroll look human. I think that might be in a response to one of the previous seasons where Lawrence sat in front of the camera and ranted about the rest of the paddock, trying to basically undermine him and force Racing Point at the time to not be relevant. But I'm not sure that he succeeded, because there's one very short portion where they try and make him look human and make it look like he cares about Lance's well-being. But then I would say the bigger portion of that episode is a very awkward Aston Martin launch party, which frankly looks like the introduction to a 007 villain, like something you would watch in a James Bond movie where you're meeting the villain for the first time. It was a bizarre thing to behold. From Lawrence walking in off the back of a boat and hearing all these people clamoring around trying to make sure everything's perfect for his arrival. The lighting, it's at night in this castle looking, I'm assuming it's an island. Looks like there's a castle there. And everything's got the green Aston Martin lighting to it. And it's just, I thought I was having a fever dream watching that episode. It was really bizarre. I will say, though, it did put into context Lance's injuries. I think it was worse than everybody thought it was. So it's good to be able to see that. And that is one of the things that Drive to Survive does do. in between the nonsense and in between the cherry-picked footage and the narrative that they build around certain drivers and relationships that doesn't exist, you do get little takeaways of information. Like the fact that Lance couldn't even really sit in the car or couldn't even press the gas pedal properly during qualifying. And then to come out in the race the way he did, I think that was extremely impressive, right? And we wouldn't have gotten that level of detail out of anybody unless it was for Drive to Survive. So that's just an example of one of the reasons Drive to Survive probably has a future, as long as they're out there listening to stuff like this and everybody else saying, guys, this is ridiculous. We need cherry pick footage of 3 different races and try and make it look like one coherent race. It's not what we want to see. So that was the Strolls. I'm not going to touch Lewis Hamilton, and Nick's comments on Lewis Hamilton. It's clear he doesn't like him. I will say, though, his Hamilton impersonation was pretty spot on. The one area that Nick got into, which I'm not sure that he really understands, is the Red Bull test and how Danny got that seat and why he got that seat. So Nick's comments were basically that it didn't make sense to put Danny in the Red Bull and compare his time in the Red Bull to Nick DeVries. Well, that's not what he was doing. Christian Horner put Danny Rick in the Red Bull for the Silverstone tire test. I guarantee you it was all pre-planned because Christian Horner never wanted Nick DeVries. That came out during the season last year, that Nick DeVries was there because of Helmut Marko. Helmut wanted him. Christian Horner wasn't fond of the idea, but ultimately it happened. So I guarantee you from that point onward, Christian Horner was looking for any reason to get him out of there. And a few bad races at the beginning of the season was all Christian needed to find another way. And he's got a great driver on the sidelines, not doing anything worthwhile, in Daniel Ricciardo. So the idea behind the test was, hey, we have an opportunity for someone who is not Max or Checo to get behind the wheel of this year's car and test it in earnest around a proper track with proper tires. Yes, it's a Pirelli tire test. Yes, they're not the tires that are being used this season, but it's a close enough analog that it doesn't break any rules, and it's the best way you're going to get to know if Danny is truly who he was when he was racing with Red Bull, because that was a concern. He spent a couple of years at Renault, building up Renault, frankly, being their number one driver and getting them a podium, 2 podiums, I think it was, which was unheard of for them at the time. Then he left there, he went to McLaren, thinking it was going to be a good move, and we all know how that went. Absolute shit show. Couldn't get to grips with the car, and unceremoniously fired. This is another thing that Drive to Survive shows this in a couple of areas. I went back and I watched the older seasons as well, and it does seem that the McLaren engineers don't sugarcoat anything. They're not very supportive of the drivers when they're not doing well. Some of that might be Drive to Survive cherry picking team radio, again, obviously. But it definitely did seem like with Carlos and with Daniel Ricciardo at McLaren over different seasons, that McLaren engineer definitely wasn't the most inspiring voice over the radio. But I digress. So we saw Daniel Rick self-destruct. And Christian Horner came out early in the season after Danny had been in the simulator a bunch saying he's picked up a lot of bad habits. He's not the driver that we thought or that we are familiar with. So the Silverstone test was an opportunity to say, okay, you've had all this simulator time. We've given you opportunities to do show car runs and other testing in different hardware. We think we've got you back to who you are. Let's put you in the car. Let's see how you perform. Are you the Danny that we think you are still? And he put it 1/10 down from Max's pole at Silverstone. Which means that if he had been in the car, in theory, and done that lap, Red Bull would have had a 1-2 in Silverstone. I forget where Checo was, but it definitely wasn't second position. So that was the mentality. It was, okay, he's back to who he was. This is the Daniel that we know. Let's get him in the car. And yes, it's not the Red Bull car. It's the AlphaTauri. But let's get a good driver in that seat who's not going to fold. Because I've said it on the other podcast as well. Yuki is Mr. Consistency. He's a 10th place driver, and he's going to finish between 8th and 13th. That's not what AlphaTauri needs. They absolutely need those points that Yuki gets, and anything that Yuki gets is well deserved and does good for the team. But they need someone who's going to get more points more regularly. And I think they thought Danny was that person. Now, obviously, unfortunately, he broke his hand. We didn't get to see much of Danny last season. But the races that he did do were well raced, especially considering most of them came after coming back from a pretty severely broken hand. So I think that kind of wraps up Danny, and hopefully, Nick and I have talked about it already, but hopefully Nick listens to this and gets a little bit more context as to why that happened. And it's not just, oh, he's fast in a Red Bull, so throw him in the AlphaTauri. No, it's more about the longer game. It's about, yes, Daniel's still the driver that he was. He just needs to be in the right area where he's comfortable. And we'll go from there. He then jumps over to Liam Lawson. And we've hashed this out as well, so his thoughts on Liam are pretty clear to me now. That's fine. I will say, though, I was not happy with the way Liam came off in the Drive to Survive season. I think his comments about not getting the seat over Yuki were pretty arrogant, pretty immature. You've been pulled in as a reserve driver because the main driver got injured. So you're getting pulled in to do your job. You were never guaranteed a contract to begin with. Yuki's been there for 4 years. Daniel's been on the grid longer than your junior career. There was really no way that Liam was ever going to get that seat. And frankly, if he did, it would have killed his career. So I think Liam was on the cusp of doing a Pierre Gasly, and we talked about that briefly in the last episode of Philosophy. So I'll leave that there. But yeah, let's hope he gets his head screwed on properly and turns it around. He made a lot of comments about Norris, and I don't believe this made it into the last episode of Philosophy. I think he's banked that for another episode. We did hash out all the McLaren topics, and I think him and I have come to a consensus on Lando Norris and Piastri and why McLaren is the way that they are. So I'll leave that for the other episode. I do have to say, though, he goes on this obscure rant about Mika Hakkinen and Ferrari making Mika Hakkinen cry in the bushes at Monza. I don't know what it is about Mika Hakkinen that gives Nick such a hard on. I really don't. And it seems to be Finnish hate in general. Listen to the way he talks about Mika Kimi, and Bottas. 3 Finns, arguably very good drivers in their own right. Obviously, 2 of them are world champions. One coulda, shoulda, woulda, but he is where he is now. And Nick can't fucking stand them. I don't know why this is. Nick's particular brand of racism seems to be very specific and unusual, also unfounded. I don't know. Again, I don't know. Maybe he was traveling through Europe one time and got lost in Finland and molested or something. I don't. We'll have to touch on that the next time we're together in conversation. But I don't know how he can hate basically an entire race that much. Sorry, race is the wrong word. An entire country of people that much. But let's keep in mind that Nick's rants are genuinely the rambling of a lunatic, and this whole podcast is effectively an experiment to see if we can somehow rehabilitate him and introduce him back into the wild. Give us a few more episodes. We are trying. So, moving on from there, he does touch on Guenther Steiner again, his favorite human being. And I have to say, this bit was pretty funny. He launches into his impersonation of Guenther, which isn't great, but it's a decent impersonation of him. And frankly, I never thought I would hear anybody suggest that Guenther Steiner is a cuckold who likes to watch his wife be plowed by Vikings. That's not something I was ready to listen to when that came out last Friday, but I have to say I had a really good laugh at that one. That was well put together. I'm not sure if he wrote that himself, but props, Nick. It was funny. The only other thing I'll say about Steiner is that Drive to Survive did do a bit of a stroke job for him. They dedicated a whole episode basically to the Guenther Steiner show. It wasn't about Haas, it was just Guenther. And like Nick said, it basically skewed the entire episode to Guenther wanted to leave. No, he didn't. No, he did not. If this hadn't come up, if Gene hadn't decided not to renew his contract, Guenther would be right where he is. And I say that because look at where Guenther is now. First race of the season, he's in the fucking paddock as a commentator for Sky Germany. And now apparently he's got a contract with a French broadcaster as well. If you didn't want to deal with F1, why the fuck are you back in the paddock race 1? No. You want to be in F1. You want to keep your face around because you want to get back on the grid. You're not sick of F1. You're just pissed off you got your contract canceled. Anyway, that's the nonsense, but we'll move on. The next bit here is Danica Patrick. I think Nick was a little nervous to put that out there, like he said in the show, because he didn't want to do it with me, because he thought I wouldn't put up with half an hour of bashing Danica Patrick because she's a woman. I don't care that she's a woman. I think we need a female voice in the paddock, and I think they've done a lot to add a number of them over the last few years. And frankly, I think most of them do a really good job. I don't really have any gripes with any of them. Nick seems to. Yeah, commentators say stupid shit. It's their job. If they're not making it sound interesting, no one's going to listen to it. So, yeah, sometimes they'll say something stupid that happens whether they're male or female. It doesn't matter. On the Danica Patrick side of it, though, I absolutely agree with Nick. She is absolutely useless. They dug her up to serve the American audience, and I think she failed at doing that. It's not hard to serve the American audience. But like you said, all she really did was get out there and say, "Oh, Vegas, baby. Holy shit." What fucking use is that? Like, she had no substance to any of her coverage on Drive to Survive. She doesn't have any substance on the grid when she's there with the commentating crew. And it's pretty clear. I mean, there's a lot of memes and video out there of her just being completely alienated, standing there around the other commentators because they don't think she deserves to be there. And she doesn't. With the shit that comes out of her mouth, there's no point in having her. It just dumbs down the IQ of everybody within 100-mile radius. Like, it is just vapid. And I don't agree with Nick's conspiratorial views on some of the topics that he mentioned during that rant, but he does have a point. Say something. Say something other than buzzwords that don't go together. Right? I don't care. Say something counter to what the guy next to you is saying. If Jensen says he thinks Max is going to win because Max has got a dominant car and he's a great driver and all that nonsense, come out and say Max Verstappen is the fucking worst driver in the history of F1 and the car is a piece of shit and I hope it fails. It's not true, but at least it'll get somebody paying attention. Why have you on the air if all you're going to say is nothing? Word salad is fucking useless. At least try and put a counterpoint. Or, if you don't want to go that route, say something meaningful. Like Nick said, talk about the track. You're an American racer who's raced in the US for many years. Say something about the country that you're racing in, that F1 is now devoted itself to, with 3 races in one country, the most out of any country that we go to, and you provide no substance about racing in the US. I don't necessarily like James Hinchcliffe because he's the one that gets dragged into the F1 official commentary, but at least he has some input as a racer. Similar careers, one's got some input, the other is completely useless. So I agree 100%. Get Danica off the fucking screen. Get her out of there. Find somebody else. And why does it have to be an American woman? You've got Bernie Collins, who Nick doesn't like. I don't understand why. Maybe because she's an engineer and Nick is a misogynist and he doesn't think that women can properly engineer. Who knows? Anyway. All in all, I'll leave it at that. I think Drive to Survive is a bit of a shit show now. They do bow to the money and pressure to not shed anything negative about F1. And that's got to stop. When I watched last year, so the coverage of the 22 season, one of the things I was most excited about was to potentially see inside the drivers' meetings that happened in Saudi Arabia. Because in practice for the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, there was a missile attack on an Aramco oil depot. And during practice that happened, you could see the smoke in the background as the cars were going around. And into the evening, the drivers all held a meeting to determine whether or not they wanted to race. They didn't feel safe. They didn't think it was safe for anybody to be there, especially given the high-profile nature of it being the first race ever in Saudi Arabia for F1. And it was hours worth of meetings. It went well until the night, I want to say like 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, their time, before that meeting was finalized and they were going to race. And through that whole saga that weekend, everybody was tweeting, and it was long, detailed posts on Reddit about it. That Netflix is there, they're filming everything. This will be interesting. We'll get an in-depth look at how that went. Season comes out, not a single fucking mention of a missile attack in Saudi Arabia. Not a single, even if they didn't want to say it was a missile attack, not a single indication that anything went amiss in Saudi Arabia. They almost canceled the fucking race. I want to say they were very close to canceling the race. And it didn't get a single mention in Drive to Survive. Why? Because Aramco, whose oil depot it was that got attacked, is one of the main sponsors of F1. That pissed me off. And that alone lost a lot of credibility for me for Drive to Survive. But I still watched this year. I did. I don't feel great about it, but like I said, I'm a rabid F1 fan and I want as much F1 content as I can, so I watch just to see if there's any useful information in it. And then I realized this year as I was watching it that, there wasn't a lot of talk about Qatar. And I went back and I watched it a couple of times. Qatar last year, for those that don't remember, was insanely hot. I want to say it was the coldest it got overnight was like 37 degrees. Logan Sargent didn't finish the race because he was so dehydrated and fatigued from the heat. A number of other drivers went to the medical center after the race for dehydration. I think the podium celebrations were slightly delayed because they couldn't get people to the podium because they were so exhausted. And that wasn't mentioned. You would think they've made changes to the regulation this year because of that race. They're trying to make it safer. It was kind of clear to everybody that, well, yeah, that wasn't a great idea. I mean, we want to go racing and nobody objected to racing in that heat. But now that we know, we're going to change it. So you would think that someone would think that it's a good idea to show at least a portion of that in the show. But no, they cut it out. The only reason I can think was why. The only reason I can think of as to why it was cut out is because it would potentially shed light that it's not safe to race in Qatar because it's too hot. Which is ridiculous. We all know it's hot. It's the fucking desert. We shouldn't race in Qatar because of their human rights violations. But F1's already been very clear that they're going to race there anyway. So if that's the case, we'll give a fuck if it's hot. This isn't about Qatar. This is about driver safety. So mention Logan Sargent didn't finish the race because he was so dehydrated that he couldn't see straight. Or that Lance Stroll was passing out down the start-stop straight. Because that leads into this year, where now you've changed regulations, and now you get to see if that regulation change helps the drivers or not. But no, let's not do it because maybe it makes Qatar look bad. That kind of stuff really pisses me off. And I think that needs to change. And if Netflix doesn't do something to change that, I think it loses a whole lot of credibility in what it's trying to do. Like, we get that it's reality TV, and reality TV is trash in general. But we do it as an escape from our own reality. So we at least want to have some entertainment, but at the same time, it's not entertaining if we know it's complete horseshit. Okay. This is now making me question my own sanity again because I'm agreeing with Nick on a number of these points that he puts so angrily out into the world. And I'm trying not to get so worked up about it, and I think this is going to go the opposite way that Nick thought it was. I think he's going to be extremely happy that I'm as frustrated with Drive to Survive as he is and less frustrated with him. So, I wonder, are they actually my own thoughts if I'm a figment of his imagination? Is his psychosis so severe that I'm legitimately forming thoughts outside of his own? Who knows? I guess we'll see. Anyway, that's it for me for tonight. Again, this was F1 Therapist trying to, let's say, dial back some of Nick's disturbing rhetoric. Not sure if I succeeded in that today. And all I can say is I will do my best to rein him in our philosophy episodes, so that I can spare you all some of the vitriol that comes your way when we don't have such a good philosophy episode. Thanks for listening. I do have to peddle the Instagram account, so F1_philosophy on Instagram. We also do have an email address if anybody wants to reach out with comments, criticisms, anything. It is f1philosophypod@gmail.com. Reach out if you want to contact us for any reason. We may or may not read it. We may or may not respond to you, but it's there. Anyway, good night, and you'll hear from us soon.